For decades, Robert Frost has occupied a very specific corner of the American imagination. With his shock of white hair and thoughtful expression, he became the ultimate grandfatherly figure of national letters. This public reverence reached its peak in 1961, when he became the first poet to participate in a presidential inauguration, standing before the nation for John F. Kennedy. The imagery associated with his name is almost always idyllic: red New England barns, stone fences, and a quiet, cozy vision of rural life. But for the readers who look closely, that warmth vanishes. Underneath the snow-covered woods, critics find a perspective suffused with what they call a shocked sense of the helpless cruelty of things. Frost's view of his own craft was surprisingly aggressive. He didn't see poetry as passive observation. He called it organized violence upon language, and a way of taking life by the throat. If America's favorite nature poet was actually using language as an act of force, then his most famous landscapes require a much more clinical investigation. While the Romantics often viewed nature as a comforting teacher, Frost saw an independent, indifferent force. In his poem Out, Out, a farmyard buzzsaw that snarled and rattled isn't a tool, it's a lethal hazard that claims a boy's life. He used these unforgiving rural settings as a laboratory for human psychology. To Frost, a farm was a dramatic backdrop where the individual will had to struggle for survival against a universe that simply didn't care. He explicitly rejected the label of nature poet, noting that almost all of his poems feature a person. For Frost, the human struggle was always the true subject. These woods and pastures are not places of escape. They are philosophical battlegrounds where humans confront their own isolation. Modernists like T.S. Eliot gained fame by breaking traditional poetic rules to sound new. Frost took a different path, innovating strictly within traditional meters. This top wave represents rigid, mathematical iambic meter. Below it is the unpredictable, raw dialect of a New England farmer. Frost forced those jagged voice tones into the rigid peaks, creating the sound of sense, trapping living conversation inside the formal structure of a poem. He was the only writer of his era to consciously try to build a new poetic idiom out of these raw spoken rhythms. This old-fashioned way to be new produced a drama of sound that makes his poetry feel like a dialogue unfolding in real time. Frost leveraged his familiar, folksy voice to deliver complex parables that trap readers who take them at face value. In Mending Wall, the famous line, "Good fences make good neighbors," is often quoted as folksy wisdom. However, the poem's energy is actually directed against the idea, highlighting the ignorance of a man clinging to a tradition he doesn't understand. The Road Not Taken is routinely used as an inspirational anthem, but Frost wrote it as a private joke about his friend Edward Thomas's indecision. These seemingly simple observations require the reader to look for the ulteriority and irony hidden just beneath the surface. This dark worldview was forged in tragedy. Frost's life was marked by severe depression and the deaths of his children, losses that fueled his search for meaning in a modern world that felt indifferent to his pain. He turned mundane chores like mending walls or picking apples into psychological coping mechanisms. These trivial metaphors provided the matrix for his most profound thinking. The persona of the resilient Yankee farmer was a calculated myth he constructed to stare down the horror of existence. Looking back at this portrait, the white hair and thoughtful eyes reflect the stoic resilience required to survive a universe that offers no easy comfort. Robert Frost articulated the modern mind's struggle to find meaning in the dirt, the terrifying and the real.